possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries.
2, 1, 0, 0. Liftoff. America's return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
Discovery, go and throttle up.
Discovery rocket, go for deploy.
Thanks, and everybody in the shuttle program. The crew is go for launch.
Roger, nice to be in orbit.
We are following their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. It's Monday, November 8th, here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. You're looking at a live view of the Dragon Endeavour spacecraft as we await its departure from the International Space Station on its way back to planet Earth. We expect Endeavour to push away from the space station at 11:05 a.m. Pacific or 19:05 GMT, with our Crew 2 astronauts, including NASA astronauts Shane Kimbrough and Megan McArthur, JAXA astronaut Aki Hoshide, and ESA astronaut Thomas Pesquet. If you joined us earlier, you'll know that the crew is suited up and the Dragon and station hatches are sealed in preparation for departure. My name is Kate Tice, and I'm a senior certification engineer here at SpaceX. It's a live production morning for us here on this Monday morning, so you might hear some noise as we broadcast, but in any case, I'm very excited to bring you live coverage of Crew Dragon completing its second trip to space with people on board as part of NASA's first official long-duration mission for its commercial crew program. Joining me today from NASA Communications is Gary Jordan.
Hey, super good to be here, Kate. Once Dragon departs the station, the crew's flight home is expected to last just a little more than 8 hours. About an hour and a half of that journey will be dedicated to a Flyaround maneuver, where the Crew 2 astronauts will make a full loop around the station to take photographs of the outside of the orbiting lab. Upon completion of the Flyaround, Dragon will use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or 4 departure burns, to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon will also execute a phasing burn to lower its orbit and line the spacecraft up with its landing location.
Next on its trip home is deorbit, entry, and landing, which covers all operations after the final departure maneuver. That includes trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of drogue and main parachutes, and finally, of course, splashdown off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover Shane, Megan, Aki, and Thomas. Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico tonight at 7:33 p.m. Pacific, 10:33 p.m. Eastern, followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by one of SpaceX's recovery vessels.
Today on board the space station is the Expedition 66 crew, led by Roscosmos cosmonaut Anton Shkaplerov, who just took over as station commander from Thomas Pesquet of ESA, now on board the Crew Dragon Endeavour. As a reminder, just like its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit, including the Flyaround, is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei will be watching the undocking and departure from the cupola, but the prime departure monitoring role falls on Shane Kimbrough and Megan McArthur from inside the Dragon. Mission controls in Houston and in Hawthorne will back them up. So now let's go over to Shaniqua Vereen at the Johnson Space Center to talk a little bit about how the station crew has been preparing to send this crew home and what we can expect to hear from Dragon as it departs from the station. Shaniqua.
Thanks, Gary. It's been a busy week during our indirect handover. Over the last several days, the astronauts worked to pack Dragon full of cargo for the return journey home. Along with our crew, Dragon will return more than 240 kilograms or 530 pounds of cargo back to Earth. The cargo includes some samples for continuing human research, some hardware, and some other items. All of this cargo will get offloaded after we get the crew out following splashdown, and the scientific samples will be sent to researchers for final analysis. The crew also took some time to get their SpaceX suits unpacked. and ready for the journey, with Aki and Thomas suiting up inside the station prior to making their way into Dragon. Since getting the hatches closed, Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur also suited up, with all 4 astronauts now in their seats and standing by for undocking. We've got a final go-no-go poll coming up in a few minutes where the joint SpaceX and NASA teams make their final call for Dragon to depart station. This is one of many checkpoints in the return that will continue all the way up until just before the deorbit burn, giving mission managers multiple chances to assess the weather at the splashdown zones, making sure everything is lining up before the Dragon departs. So we'll stand by for that final go-no-go poll, but for now, everything continuing to look good for an on-time departure. With that, I'll throw it back over to you, Kate and Gary in Hawthorne.
Thanks, Shaniqua. So separation is set for approximately 11:05 a.m. Pacific, 19:05 GMT, just a few minutes from now. At the moment, Dragon is in its final configuration before undocking, and we are waiting for mission operators to conduct their go, no-go poll on whether to move forward with the docking procedure.
Now, a note for on its trip home, just like during its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board.
Once the docking sequence is complete, Dragon will use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers or 4 departure burns, and that'll increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. From there, a phasing burn will place Dragon on a trajectory back to Earth.
On its trip home is deorbit, entry and landing, which covers all operations after the final departure maneuver. That includes trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, and then finally, splashdown off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover the Crew 2 astronauts inside Crew Dragon from the water.
Yeah, so we are expecting the call for that go, no-go here in the next few minutes or so. So as we mentioned before, weather has been a watch.
SpaceX final configurations for undock are complete and nominal. Ground is go for undocking with the targeted undock sequence start time of 1900 Zulu. Please confirm visors are down and crew readiness for undock and departure at the planned time of 1900 Zulu.
Endeavour copies. Go for undock at 1900 Zulu. Visors are down.
Copy all. Thank you, Megan.
Station Houston on 2 for Mark. Perform steps 2 through end of 1.602. Dragon departure monitoring.
Copy 2 through end, and the ISIS crew is ready for Dragon undocking.
All right, and with that,
Houston copies.
With that, we just heard the confirmation that Dragon is go for undock. All of the teams supporting are ready. We're now waiting for that final undocking sequence to actually begin. So once that happens, right at 11 o'clock Pacific, it will take about 5 minutes for Dragon to physically separate from the International Space Station, which has been its home for the last 6 months.
This is the first step in the automatic undocking sequence. The first step is to release for those umbilicals to retract. Those umbilicals are what's connecting Dragon systems to the space station, transferring power, telemetry, and commands between the 2 vehicles throughout Dragon's stay. Once that's complete, Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station by releasing the 12 hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases. All of that will take roughly 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to depart from station and begin to push itself further and further away using those Draco thrusters.
Dragon's initial departure from the station is a little different from other docked vehicles like the Soyuz that rely on springs to push them away from the docking port. Dragon will actually execute 2 very short thruster firings to undock using a combination of the 12 Draco engines that are around the base of the capsule. You can actually see some of them in this view. With the first breaking any stiction between the Dragon and the docking port, and the second slowly backing the spacecraft away. We're expecting the call for the undocking sequence to begin in the next couple of minutes or so, maybe 5 minutes if we start right on time. Since we've last been with you, a lot has happened. I think we went off air maybe about an hour and a half ago, right when the Dragon hatch was closed. In that hour and a half, Mark Van de Hei on the station side closed the A-Pass hatch, or the hatch that's adjacent to that Dragon hatch, creating a vestibule in between the two hatches. He also closed the hatch to the pressurized mating adapter 3, which is on the nadir, or the zenith side, space-facing side of No. 2. With all of that, he was able to execute the depressurization between the station and the Dragon, the vestibule, that middle part in between, putting it down to vacuum. You can see them all suited up from this camera view inside the Dragon. They also performed a series of leak checks. We had 4 good leak checks. And of course, just before we started this broadcast, the vestibule leak check, which is very important, making sure that that vestibule is down to vacuum and there's no leaks. That was performed, and we had a good leak check on there. Handing over to the SpaceX side to do a residual leak check. Now just really counting down to execute this undocking sequence. Again, a 5-minute sequence here to start in about 4 minutes.
Like we said before, those umbilicals are going to disconnect first. That's what is connecting power and telemetry and communication to station. And once those umbilicals are released, we'll then begin to unlatch the hooks that are physically connecting Dragon to station. Once again, all 4 Crew 2 astronauts are seated in their seats there inside Dragon Endeavour. There we see a shot with pilot Megan MacArthur there on the right-hand side, and Commander Shane Kimbrough on the left-hand side.
They even have a view of their own Dragon on the middle screen. That is fantastic. The Dragon itself is on the space-facing side of the International Space Station. When it undocks, it will perform those 2 undocking burns that we were talking about. The next burn that it'll perform is called an impulsive retreat burn. That burn sets it up in a position essentially at waypoint 1. Which is at about 220 meters. It'll do a short hold for about a minute before executing a fly-around maneuver. And it will be in this fly-around position for about an hour and a half, going essentially around the station fully. Starting at the 12 o'clock position and then going full clockwise around until you hit the other 12 o'clock position. It's going to hit the aft side first. So we'll see the aft and then the nadir, or the underside of the International Space Station. That'll happen what's scheduled to be in an orbital nighttime. So it'll be the lights that are on the outside of the International Space Station that are illuminating it as the crew inside Dragon take some photographs of the exterior of the station. We haven't done this since a Soyuz fly-around in 2018 when we did a fly-around survey, and the crew were able to take digital photographs of the outside. It's really helpful for the analysis of the exterior and some of the integrity. There's a lot of cameras on the outside of the space station. In fact, you're seeing one of them now providing a fantastic view of Dragon, but they can't see everything. So this survey is going to provide fill in the gaps, really, between what the station cameras can provide and whatever the robotic arm is able to provide as it surveys the outside. This will provide some of the latest data of what the status is of the outside of the International Space Station.
Now, for those of you that might be unfamiliar with Crew Dragon and how it works, there on your screen, we're actually looking at Crew Dragon, and to us, it looks upside down. To the folks in space, there is no right side up or upside down. So while it looks to us like the crew might be sitting upside down, they can't feel it as they are in microgravity. But the part that is connected to the space station is the pressurized section, which you see there. The part that we saw in the previous view that was the dark cylinder underneath the pressurized section, that is the unpressurized section, also known as the trunk. That portion of Dragon will be jettisoned prior to reentry. By doing so, we will expose the heat shield and allow for the heat shield to protect the capsule upon reentry. So just a little map of Dragon, if you will, for folks that might be unfamiliar. Looks like we lost our view there, but we'll bring it back as soon as we can.
and is very important, all of those different parts of the Dragon. Now, as we're undocking, we do have word that we will not have KU or a video downlink of the Dragon during undocking. So there's a handover of satellites in between that time. So we'll be able to confirm verbally and with the teams supporting in Mission Control Houston and Mission Control Hawthorne that the sequence has begun and that the Dragon has physically separated.
SpaceX undock sequence has been commanded.
All right, so right on time. The undocking sequence has been commanded. This sets an automatic series of events to unlatch all 12 hooks that are holding Dragon in place. You heard about the umbilical retraction, and of course, we'll confirm physical separation.
Endeavour, SpaceX, umbilicals are demated.
There we go. Okay, so to take us through this sequence, now that we are in the undocking sequence, scheduled for an on-timed undocking at 11:05, let's send it over to Shaniqua Vereen over at Mission Control in Houston.
Thanks, Gary. And we just heard confirmation that the umbilical has retracted. We are currently waiting for all those hooks to open, and that's 2 sets of 6, so 12 total to unhook from the Dragon before we are
Endeavour, SpaceX on
called.
Dragon to ground. Repeating calls for TDRS. The umbilicals are demated and the undock sequence has been commanded. Group 1 hooks are driving.
Endeavour copies on the big loop.
And that was confirmation that umbilicals have retracted, and we are waiting for all the hooks to current hooks are driving, and we are waiting for all of them to unhook before we have that full confirmation of separation. You'll hear from the Core and Hawthorne as
Commentator.
Endeavour,
We're about
SpaceX first
halfway
set of
there.
hooks are open.
and that was confirmation from the Core to the crew. We're about halfway there. Hooks of that first set are done. We're driving the second set now. Hooks are still driving.
All hooks are open
And we have
nominal.
confirmation of separation.
Endeavor copies.
Dragon has started to push itself away from the station. And with that, Shane, Megan, Aki, and Thomas have completed their journey aboard the International Space Station.
Station on 2, Dragon separation visually confirmed.
Houston copies and kickers.
Confirmed physical separation at 1:05 p.m. Central Time as the station was flying 259 statute miles.
Endeavor copies.
As the station and Dragon was... That was confirmed physical separation at 1:05 p.m. Central Time as the station was flying 259 statute miles off the coast of Chile. 2 good undocking burns and a nominal impulsive retreat burn. Next will be a brief hold at waypoint 1 before the fly-around sequence is executed. We'll be monitoring Crew Dragon throughout the departure sequence as it makes its way from the International Space Station. Godspeed to Shane, Megan, Aki, and Thomas. To take you through the rest of the departure sequence, we'll send you back over to Hawthorne.
Dragon eyes have converged, and Dragon is navigating on Dragon Eye 2. We will time out of impulsive retreat 1 point and into go to 1.
Endeavor copies.
Dragon SpaceX, we see the onboard warnings for Dragon Eye 1. No correction is required. Dragon is navigating on Dragon Eye 2.
Copy. Good. Dragon Eye 2.
And we're following along as the Crew Dragon Endeavor is backing away from the International Space Station.
Go to waypoint. MSs are doffing suits.
SpaceX copies in go to 1, and the MSs are doffing suits. We will transition cameras to external only if desired.
And SpaceX not required.
SpaceX copies.
Station on 2, the ISS thrusters are enabled.
Houston copies.
So a lot happening there. The Dragon is about 100 meters away from the International Space Station at this point. The crew inside have gotten the go to start doffing their suits. Now past the dynamic phase of undocking where the suits are required. So they'll start doffing as they head out to waypoint 1, which is about another 100 meters away as they slowly make their way out. They're going to waypoint 1, which is about 200 meters away, right at the edge of the keep out sphere. They'll hold for about a minute before starting the fly around maneuver. Starting at this very top or zenith position towards the space-facing side. See them backing up. They're about at this position, actually, right now, about halfway. Then they'll execute a 50-second fly-around burn 1. This will take them from the zenith or the space-facing side to the aft or the back of the station and cruise for a bit until they hit the aft portion. It's expected that during this part of the flight will be in an orbital nighttime. So right about these two burns, Flyaround burns 1 and burn 2, we should be getting some views of the International Space Station, maybe even of the Dragon, but they will be a little bit on the darker side. Then, of course, the next two burns, burn 3 and burn 4, will be in the daylight, and the whole maneuver itself will take about an hour and a half. You can see the position of the Dragon, the very top portion of the Dragon with the nose cone face down towards the International Space Station at all times. This allows for the crew inside with a perfect window view looking down at the International Space Station to take digital photographs the entire way around. It's a photographic survey opportunity of the exterior of the International Space Station, allowing the crew to visualize some of the areas of the space station that can't normally be seen by some of the external cameras on board. Not too long after it makes this full loop over the course of an hour and a half, there are 2 departure burns. Departure burn 0, that gets them outside of the keep out sphere, which they will have been hugging for about an hour and a half, and then depart burn 1, which sends them right outside the approach ellipsoid. At that time, we are outside of joint operations between the International Space Station flight control teams and the Dragon teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne. They'll be taking control of Dragon's journey for the remainder of its flight down to splash down off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, targeting an on-time splashdown at 7:33 p.m. Pacific time tonight.
Yeah, so we've had an exciting morning so far. The call-outs that we heard just a couple minutes ago was an indication that everything is looking good and that both Aki and Thomas can doff or take off their spacesuit. This will allow them to have a little better mobility about the cabin in order to take those photos. Like Gary mentioned, these photos will help basically fill in the blanks that the onboard cameras currently have on station as
SpaceX Endeavour MS-1 is out of the suit, ready to support Flyaround.
SpaceX copies. MS-1 is ready for Flyaround on Dragon ground.
All right, so there's that call indicating that Thomas has removed his suit and he's ready to take some photos. He'll be doing that as the nose cone is still currently open. And so there's actually a very small circular window at the top of the forward hatch. And he's going to be taking those photos of the station using that port, essentially. And it is tight quarters, so obviously being able to have a little better mobility will certainly be useful to him here coming up.
So again, they're past that dynamic phase, which is why they're getting out of their suits, and they'll remain there. The Dragon itself will fly autonomously. The crew do have the ability to execute small manual correction burns if necessary, but for the most part, Dragon will take that flight around the International Space Station automatically. The flight computers themselves were programmed just ahead of undocking, getting ready for that essentially fly-around sequence. For the fly-around sequence to begin, it's a different set of burns to get them out to that hold point and then eventually around the station. We are getting fantastic views from the Dragon Eye, some of the Dragon cameras that are on the forward end of Dragon pointing down, and that position will be held really throughout this entire fly-around flight. We're a little more than halfway there, about 130 meters at this point. Again, we're getting to about 180 to somewhere between 180 to 220 until we get to that waypoint 1 hold point. We will not stay there for very long. It's only about a minute. And then if everything looks good, which the flight control team are trying to determine right now if they're good to go to proceed, they'll execute that fly-around burn pretty much immediately.
Yeah, so that shot that we just had inside the cabin, you could actually see Thomas there just underneath Megan and Shane taking these photos as we had indicated. Hopefully we'll get that feedback momentarily. But this view...
SpaceX, no response required, but we are going to clear the onboard Dragon Eye 1 and Dragon Eye like sensor cross-check alerts from your board. They are no longer active.
Yeah, so this is a live view from Dragon, and there's that shot inside the cabin. pilot Megan MacArthur on the right-hand side, Commander Shane Kimbrough on the left-hand side, and that's Thomas Pesquet, basically the designated professional photographer of this mission. If you've been following along on his Twitter account, there have been absolute golden photos that he's really captured all along this mission, and I'm excited to see, what he might be putting his skills to here as he continues to survey the station during this fly around.
Interestingly enough, it looks like the photographic survey is beginning now, even before the fly around. Now that they have, they're only about 140 meters away at this point, but you can see an absolutely gorgeous view of the space-facing side of the International Space Station. Really good to take pictures now because we're getting this view while we're in an orbital daytime. It won't be long until we have a sunset here as we make that first burn maneuver to go from the very top, or the zenith space-facing side. We're going to first go towards the aft or back of the space station, towards the Russian segment. That'll be the first part of this journey around the space station to take this photographic survey.
Now, if you're looking at the screen and wondering what that red thing is floating near Thomas' head, and there's a blue one on the left-hand side, those are his earpieces. Those are basically part of the uniform. That's what allows him to hear communications during the mission, not necessarily at this point in time, but it looks kind of silly to see them floating there, so I just wanted to point those out for awareness.
Right below the International Space Station is the South Atlantic Ocean. We just passed the southern tip of South America, and we're now heading on a northeasterly course. The Terminator line that separates light from dark is right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean right now, so we're expecting sunset in about 15 minutes. So Thomas Pesquet taking pictures of the space-facing side of the entire International Space Station while he can. He's got about 15 minutes of daylight left.
Live shot there of Mission Control Center here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, just to the side of us. Like I mentioned before, it is a bustling Monday morning. Here we are a live manufacturing environment, so there is some background noise as we're literally building rockets and spacecraft right behind us. But yeah, that's a shot of our mission control here in Hawthorne.
So you're looking at the control room right now because we are sort of in between the video coverage that we're getting from the International Space Station. You see some of the views are absolutely gorgeous. There is a data link between the space station and the Dragon that provides high bandwidth communications. But for the most part, a lot of that video from the Dragon side will be when we go over ground stations. From the space station side, we use TDRS, or Tracking and Data Relay Satellites, that are in geosynchronous orbit about 23,000 miles from Earth. To give you some perspective, the Dragon crew and the International Space Station crew is about 250 miles, so quite a bit. But they provide that video coverage, the video downlink that we're seeing from the outside of the station. This is probably the longest period of a handover between the satellites that we'll see throughout the flyover maneuver. There's a couple of dips that we may see from video as they're making that their way around, and we'll just see what we get as we make our way around. We have that video coverage from the station camera, so we may be able to see the station side looking out at. There we go. We're already getting some of that. Fantastic. So you can see with the station cameras overexposed, that aperture nice and wide, we can actually see some of the Draco engines firing those thrusters to stabilize Dragon as it makes its retreat out to about 220 meters, now at about 160. Looking straight down at the International Space Station. Of course, they're looking straight up. Again, we're about 10 minutes away from an orbital sunset. You can see the views a little bit even dark at this point. It might be because of the overexposure, just to see some of those Draco engines firing. And high definition views as well. Fantastic Hopefully we get a lot of these, Kate, as we make our way around the station. Again, we're in some of the longer handover periods now, but we may see it. The cameras themselves should be getting some good views of the Dragon as it makes its way around. Some of the views from Dragon looking down at the International Space Station that we were seeing towards very shortly after undocking. We'll maybe get some of those as well. So this will be a very fun hour and a half.
Yeah, I want to point out real quick while we still have this view that the tiny light there in the center of the dark circle, that is the window in which Thomas is utilizing to take photos during the Flyaround. So right now, Thomas is looking back at us as we're looking at him. Once again, you can see that nose cone is open. It will remain open for the duration of the Flyaround, and of course, prior to re-entry, it'll close once we are completely done utilizing the Draco thrusters located there at the forward hatch.
You can sort of see them too, the outline of the four forward bulkhead Dracos. Those will be used for a lot of the more important maneuvers. I think the most important of which is the deorbit burn. Very, very important maneuver that is essentially committing Dragon to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and splashing down. Right now, we're still tracking weather, and we will continue to do so over the next 8 hours as we make our way down closer towards that splashdown time, 7:33 p.m. Pacific, 10:33 p.m. Eastern Standard. But those forward bulkhead Dracos will fire for 16.5 minutes, super critical time, and that will put the Dragon in a position to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere.
This shot is also great because not only can we see the forward hatch, so that's the hatch that's utilized to get in and out of Crew Dragon while it's on station, but we can also slightly see the side hatch, which is on the left-hand side of the vehicle. It's a square shape, which doesn't look like a square from this angle. However, it's that panel there on the left-hand side of the vehicle. That, of course, is the hatch in which the crew uses to ingress or get on board Dragon on day of launch, and of course it will be the hatch that they use later this evening to egress or exit the vehicle once the crew splashes down and is recovered by the SpaceX recovery team on one of our recovery vessels.
And that'll be open for the first time in 199 days. By the time that they splash down at 10:33 p.m. Eastern Time, they're only about 7 hours shy of making it to that 200-day mark. But it will be 199 by the time they actually open up that hatch. It's been closed the entire time that it's been on station. Very important section of the Dragon, right towards us, where we're looking at from this camera view, towards essentially what is the top of that side hatch. That's where the drogue parachutes are. Shortly after re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, mortars will fire to release those two drogue chutes.
Endeavour, SpaceX for Flyaround.
Go ahead for Flyaround.
All right, Endeavour, you are go to command ISS Flyaround once hold 1 is reached. It is a required urgent command as soon as we enter hold 1 to limit prop consumption. So repeating, you are go to command Flyaround once Dragon enters hold 1.
Endeavour copies go to initiate ISS Flyaround at hold 1 with no delay.
That is a very critical time. Megan MacArthur, the pilot of the Crew 2 mission, by the time they actually get to what they're talking about, hold 1, that's waypoint 1. Right now they're at about 185 meters from the International Space Station. They're heading out to approximately 220. At that point, Dragon will transition to hold mode or hold 1, whereas holding at that waypoint to limit the prop consumption, as was mentioned over the Dragon to ground loops. The big loop actually right now, as even the station team is listening in, the station crew, Mark Van de Heij namely, who's monitoring this sequence right now. That will be about a minute that they have from the time that they enter hold 1 to the time that the first fly-around burn is initiated. That burn being the first of 4. It'll be a zenith to aft burn. It's about a 50-second burn that maneuvers the Dragon into a position to essentially cruise down to right behind or at the aft section of the International Space Station. So again, you're seeing, we were getting fantastic views of the Dragon looking right up at it. And Kate, you were perfectly describing that tiny little hole that Thomas is going to be taking photos out of. You can see even after that first burn is executed, those burns will actually keep Dragon in a position where that forward hatch, what we're looking at right now with that bright circle at the very dead center, that's where Thomas Pesquet will be taking some of the digital photographs. That forward hatch will be pointing towards the International Space Station at all times as it makes its way around the International Space Station with, again, all 4 fly-around burns to make that perfect loop all the way around.
Once again, this flyover maneuver is brand new to Crew Dragon. This is the first time that we will be executing it. The maneuver itself is basically a photographic survey of the station. Yeah, so there you can see kind of big picture. Dragon is going to be making one big loop around station, and Thomas Pesquet will be taking photographs through the port window, essentially there on the forward hatch of the station, which will hopefully fill in some gaps that currently exist in terms of the photographs that have taken of station. So even though there are many cameras on station, unfortunately there are certain spots, certain angles that can't be photographed just due to physical location. So Thomas will be taking pictures, and essentially Dragon will be making one big loop around station to perform this photographic survey.
This was a normal, this was a very standard procedure for the shuttle. The shuttle used to undock from the International Space Station, regularly survey the station, providing updates, particularly when it was under construction, right? It was a very dynamic phase. That was more of the assembly phase of the International Space Station. We're in pretty much the third decade. After more than 20 years, we are in it. This is the time of maximum utilization. So there have been a couple of additions recently to the International Space Station, namely commercial modules. I think most recently was the NanoRacks Bishop airlock, which is essentially a way to deploy satellites. It also removes trash. It can also retrieve some ORUs or replacement unit spare parts from the outside with the help of the robotic arm. So there are a couple of new elements, and we'll be able to see that for the very first time after this fly-around. The last fly-around that happened was on board a Russian Soyuz, where Drew Feustel, NASA astronaut, used a handheld camera to do the exact same thing. As the Soyuz undocked from the International Space Station, it did the same thing, did a photographic survey as it flew around, and so those are from 2018. So this will be brand new, 2021, and we'll get to see some of those new modules, like the NanoRacks airlock module, as well as a couple of other things, the Bartolomeo external platform that's on the European Space Agency side. So this will be very important to see.
So there on your screen, that is once again a live view of Crew Dragon Endeavour departing the International Space Station with the Crew 2 crew on board. And those pulses that you see are actually pulses coming from the Draco thrusters on board Dragon in order for Dragon to hold position and maneuver. Like we said, it's going to be performing this fly-around maneuver. Those Draco thrusters we can see activating in order to hold course.
It looks very bright because the cameras themselves on the International Space Station are right now overexposed. By doing so, it allows us to see some of those Draco maneuvering thrusters. There, it's becoming clearer now. We're in an orbital. We're about to enter into an orbital sunset. So you were getting some glimpses from the Dragon. We just got a second of it. It looked like looking down at the space station, still a little bit illuminated by the sun. That will not last very long. about 2 more minutes is when we're expected to hit that hold 1 point at about 220 meters. We're at about 217 at this point, so we're slowing down, getting ready to get to that hold point. Again, Megan MacArthur, the pilot, who from this camera view is on the right.
Endeavour has initiated Flyaround.
There we go.
Copy Endeavour, Flyaround is initiated. We are tracking.
So a little bit earlier than expected, but it seems like we did hit that hold point, and it was not long at all before Megan MacArthur initiated that burn. Right now we're in a 50-second burn, the first of 4 to fly around the International Space Station.
Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground. We see the onboard alerts for Dragon Eye. Time of flights are still converged.
Say again, you are not readable.
Repeating call. We see the onboard alerts for Dragon Eye 1 and Dragon Eye 2 geometric filters. The time of flight filters are still converged.
And SpaceX still very difficult to hear. Copy, you see the messages. I believe these are expected in this quadrant. Is that correct?
That's affirmative, Endeavour. The geometric filters were lost, but the time of flight filters are still converged. So Dragon is still in a good configuration for Flyaround.
Copy, good config for Flyaround.
Station Houston for Mark. You are go to stand down for monitoring Dragon's Flyaround.
Copy, thanks much, and to the Dragon crew, I'll be looking for you if I get a chance to see you outside, but very quickly wanted to say thanks to all of you. Thomas, thanks for being such a great guy, an inspiring, famous person from France. Aki, you're a commander who knew exactly when to be serious and when to be funny. Let me just stop talking if I'm talking too long. Jane, thanks for being such a great example of what putting others first looks like. And Megan, thanks for becoming a sister to me up here in space. I'll miss hearing your laughter in adjacent modules.
Hey, Mark, we're really going to miss you. Had such a great time with you. Learned a lot from you. And I know you're going to treat Crew 3 really well. And let us know if we can do anything for you. Take care. Fly safe.
Yeah, get home safely. It's been a great part being. It's been great being part of your team.
Likewise, my friend. Take care of Anton and Piotr for us.
I'll do that right now.
You were hearing NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei, the sole NASA astronaut now on board the International Space Station, relieved of his duties to monitor the retreat of Dragon out to the hold point. And now he can stand down for monitoring the Flyaround. Some wonderful words from Mark Vande Hei, who got to spend the entire 197 days that the Crew 2 astronauts spent on board the International Space Station. Vande Hei being a crew member that's staying on board for almost a year as part of the Soyuz rotation crew. A shout out to the Crew 3 astronauts who are set to launch just a few days from now, no earlier than November 10th. To make their way to the International Space Station. It'll be Mark Vande Hei's job to brief them on everything that the space station, everything about the space station, where things are, about emergency procedures. So he'll do the handover as Crew 2 is returning home now.
As we mentioned previously, we prefer to do direct handovers from crew to crew, but the weather off the Space Coast and just around Florida in general has been incredibly tricky the last week, really. So the teams at NASA and SpaceX did reviews and jointly made the decision that the best thing to do for both Crew 3 and Crew 2 would to be bring the Crew 2 crew home before launching Crew 3, purely because of weather restrictions. We've been monitoring splashdown conditions on both sides of Florida, including wave height and wind speed, and those are really primary restrictions on allowing the crew to splash down, and it just happens to be that today was our best day to attempt that splashdown.
And before undocking, we did a weather brief, and the Crew 2 astronauts are undocked today because they did a weather brief of the prime landing site, Pensacola, and it looks fantastic. Even with the trajectory, it's about 8.5 hours, even fitting in this fly-around maneuver, which they're doing right now. So we just executed a good 50-second burn, the first of 4 to fly around the International Space Station. We're now in a cruise phase between what's called the zenith, or the space-facing side of the International Space Station. We're heading to aft. That's the Russian segment of the International Space Station. We'll be getting some great views the whole way. We're in an orbital nighttime, so we're relying on some of the external floodlights on the outside of the space station to illuminate those views, and Thomas Pesquet has his camera ready, taking some of those surveys. We're getting some views as we're going in and out of that connection from between Dragon and station, but it looks like we have some Dragon views now. You can see a lot of, particularly the habitable volume of the space station is illuminated. We'll be in this position for at least this one, from the zenith or the space facing to the aft or the back, for about 20 minutes. It's about a 20-minute transit to get to that next point, which is essentially right on the V bar, or the velocity bar. That's directly behind the International Space Station. There are no hold points throughout this maneuver, so right at about that time, they'll execute another 50-second burn. That'll do essentially the same thing, maneuver from the aft section or the back to the very underside of the International Space Station. We did hear Mark Vande Hei actually mention that even though he's not in a monitoring phase for watching the fly-around maneuver, he's been relieved of those duties. Right on the Earth-facing side of the International Space Station is a 7-bay window called the cupola. Provides fantastic views of the Earth, and it's used very frequently for capture operations for some of the cargo craft that come to and from the International Space Station, but it'll also provide a very good view of his crewmates who will be flying around the International Space Station at that time on the underside or on the Earth-facing side of the International Space Station. So we'll hopefully get a couple of fantastic shots from Mark Vande Hei taking some of those photos. By about that time, when the Dragon is directly underneath the International Space Station, we should even be in an orbital sunrise. So we should get some sunrise photos as well.
Yeah. The shot that we had a little earlier with that nighttime view and all the exterior lighting of station, something about it so black and white, kind of looked like it could be in a Kubrick film.
Right.
Yeah. As we saw before, oh, right, there it is, actually. We have some shots there inside the Crew Dragon capsule. You could, when we get that back, you might notice that Thomas Pesquet has taken off his spacesuit to allow him to have better mobility while taking some photos. Once again, this fly-around maneuver is essentially a photographic survey of station, and this is super helpful because, as Gary mentioned before, the last time this was performed was 2018, I think you said?
That's right.
And there have been lots of new additions on station since then, so this is a new capability for Crew Dragon. This will be the first time we're executing it today, and so Thomas Pesquet will be taking photos. They're in night mode inside Crew Dragon.
It's likely to limit the glare from the lit cabin inside the Dragon, likely reflecting off of the single window that Thomas Pesquet is using to take those photographs. We're in an orbital nighttime, right? So the only thing illuminating the outside of the space station is the lights of the space station itself. So limit those glares and get even better photographs. I cannot wait to see these photographs that Thomas is taking.
Yeah, you can kind of think of it as, imagine if you're in a car and, somebody's driving a car in the middle of the night and you're sitting in the passenger seat and you turn the interior cabin lights on and you try to take a picture of something scenic outside, right? You're probably not going to be able to capture that because the interior cabin lights are reflecting off of your window. So you turn the lights off and enable night mode on your camera and take some pictures.
I bet you they do the same thing during crew sleep as well. The Crew 2 astronauts had about a 24-hour transit to the International Space Station. Almost. It was just shy of 24 hours. So as part of that was an 8-hour sleep period. So everybody found a place inside Dragon, either bunking up in the seats, which I think is more common, or just finding a random spot to strap yourself and float, but they get an 8-hour rest period. Not on this flight, because it is a very short transit, and so we're going to be doing this for about an hour and a half, circling around the International Space Station, and then from there, you're really only at about, 6.5 hours, maybe 6 hours, from the time that you execute that first departure burn, which is departure burn 0, to break out of the Flyaround and then make your way towards splashing down off the coast of Florida.
Yeah. So once again, we have been keeping an eye on weather. We are targeting a splashdown off the coast of Florida near Pensacola, and we're targeting that at 7:33 p.m. Pacific time this evening. So, like Gary said, once we complete the fly-around maneuver, while it will be another 6.5 hours left, big picture, that's actually a pretty quick trip home, and I'm sure that after the 199 days that they have spent in space, they're all excited to get home and see their families.
Absolutely. So they're going to be splashing down off the coast of Florida, and there's going to be recovery teams there. The Go Navigator recovery ship will be stationed out in the Gulf of Mexico. We'll see a lot of that action as we get closer to that period, about 8 hours, maybe a little less than that at this point from now, until we actually splash down off of the coast. We're going to see all the action. It'll be a nighttime splashdown, unfortunately, but we did see a lot of that for Crew 1, and we did get some pretty good views of the fast boats going out and really readying that capsule inside the water to be picked up by the A-frame, which is on the back of the Go Navigator and positioned inside the Dragon nest. Like you said, Kate, from there, the crew themselves are going to be extracted, or they're going to egress the Dragon spacecraft. There are some medical facilities that are on the boat, but what will likely happen is they'll take a helicopter ride out to the coast of Florida, where they'll have different planes stationed ready to take them home. 3 of the crew members, Shane Kimbrough, Megan MacArthur, and Aki Hoshide, will take a plane out to Houston. They'll undergo a series of additional medical checks and just make sure they're ready to go, and they'll have a chance to see their family. Thomas Pesquet will depart for Europe. So we're in the middle of a fly-around period now, so we should be in this period for, it's a cruise phase between the zenith or the space-facing side until we get to the aft side. We're here for about another 10 minutes. It's about a 20-minute transit from the very top, or the R bar, essentially right in line with the top of the International Space Station, to the aft position. There's going to be no stops along the way. It's a very fluid transit from each of these different periods, but once we get to the V bar, we're essentially right in line with the velocity bar of the International Space Station. You can see it there. It's the point directly to the back or to the aft of the International Space Station. Right there, they'll execute another 50-second burn to enter into another cruise phase. It limits the prop, right? They need to save a lot of that prop for some of the departure burns, and you can see 2 of them are part of this fly around to actually break out from it. But this is essentially where we are right now. In fact, we're about halfway through the maneuver. This position that you're seeing right now in this graphic is pretty much where they are, about halfway between the zenith, or the space-facing most point, and the aft, or the backmost point of the International Space Station. And again, a 50-second maneuver. It's just to limit prop. After these 50-second burns, they enter into a cruise phase. So the next maneuver will be just about another 20 minutes, maybe a little bit more than that, 25 minutes, to get from the aft position to the nadir, or the bottom position. Right about that time, they'll be entering into just about this period where you see the Crew Dragon on this graphic. That will be about where we see an orbital sunrise. So we'll be able to photograph the underside of the space station while it's lit and illuminated by the sun. And about that time, we should see Mark Vande Hei. Well, not see Mark Vande Hei, but it's about that time that Mark Vande Hei from out inside the space station will be taking digital photographs of the Dragon, as the Dragon is taking photographs of the cupola. Maybe we may even get to see Thomas Pesquet take a photo of the cupola maybe seeing Dragon, seeing Mark Vande Hei inside. Another 50-second burn right at the bottom there at the nadir position to get over to the forward end of the International Space Station, all in the daylight. So we should be getting some great views of, well, at this point, which is the U.S. side, U.S. OS side. We'll be getting to see some of the U.S. modules, some of the commercial modules that I was talking about, as well as the international modules. Right about here, you'll get some great views of the nadir, the underside, as well as part of the forward parts of the Japanese module, the GEM, as well as the Columbus module, which is the European module, each with their own respective external facilities. The Japanese exposed facility has a lot of experiments on the outside, and then we have the commercial module Bartolomeo, a ESA, European Space Agency astronaut, and Airbus partnership, which is another external platform, does a lot of the same things, external payloads. So we'll get to see some of those, which have been installed. Well, the Bartolomeo, at least, has been installed recently.
Endeavour, SpaceX on Dragon to ground for cabin temperature.
Go ahead on Dragon to ground.
We see on the ground that the cabin temperature has been increasing slightly and is at a little elevated level. We're wondering how you're feeling in the cabin and if you'd like us to take any commanding to cool the cabin off.
In SpaceX, our temperature is adequate at this time.
Copy that, Endeavour. Thank you.
All right, no need to adjust the thermostat for the inside of Endeavour. All the crew feeling pretty good. We were seeing Commander Shane Kimbrough and pilot Megan MacArthur inside, stationed in their same seats. They were still suited up. We saw Thomas Pesquet doffed or took off his suit fairly quickly after undocking and some of those initial burns, the undocking burn and the impulsive retreat burn, because it's his job to take photos of the outside of the International Space Station. I thought I saw Aki there for a bit.
I think he
with
did.
His suit still on, assisting Thomas Pesquet, but we'll be in this position for quite some time. The whole fly-around maneuver takes about an hour and a half.
Now, for those that might be unfamiliar with how teams in space communicate with those on ground, you have probably noticed by now that there is a beep that precedes communication. This is known as the Quindar tone. If you've watched pretty much any space movie ever, you probably might recognize it. But essentially, that tone rings, and then the destined. So, for example, if I were calling Dragon here from SpaceX, I would say Dragon SpaceX because I am calling Dragon and I am calling from SpaceX. So you basically identify the destination first, as well as the origin of the communication as well.
And then what loop you are calling on.
Yes.
So it's who you want to talk to, who is calling, who is doing the calling, and then what loop you're essentially talking on. For a while, they were on the big loop, right? So the International Space Station could hear them as well, and you heard that term. That's where really every team is integrated. The Dragon teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne, the Dragon crew, Houston Mission Control, which is controlling the International Space Station, as well as the Space Station crew themselves. Once we exit outside of the approach ellipsoid, we'll break that off, and we'll be relying namely on Dragon to ground. So again, we're in the cruise phase between the nadir, or the space-facing side, and the aft side. We should be here for another maybe 6 minutes or so until we get to the aftmost portion, or the very back of the International Space Station. From there, we'll do another 50-second burn to get us from the aft to the nadir position, which is at the very bottom. And right around that time, we should hopefully be seeing views from the International Space Station or from the Dragon, depending on the ground sites and our coverage there. But we should be seeing an orbital sunrise as well.
Yeah, so there on your screen, a view of Mission Control Center here at SpaceX Hawthorne. This is where ground teams are commanding Dragon when necessary. But for the most part, Dragon is flying itself. This whole process of undocking and deorbiting, this whole journey is intended to be autonomous. Dragon essentially driving itself, which is a super important capability.
Now you're seeing the commander and the pilot. When we do get those views, Shane Kimbrough as commander, Megan MacArthur as pilot, they're still in their designated positions, the commander and pilot seats, and they are monitoring every step of the way, right? Even though Dragon is completely controlling itself, they have views of the Dragon Eye camera, which is looking down at the space station. You can see that on the commander's side. They have views of the trajectories. They have views of the Earth. They're looking at all the thrusters. They are checking every step of the way to make sure that the Dragon is healthy. But they also have, of course, the teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne doing the same, even monitoring their cabin temperature, making sure they're at they're very nice and comfortable inside the Dragon.
Yeah, they still have a few hours left to go. I can imagine that working up a sweat at this point, probably not the most comfortable condition. As we saw earlier, Thomas has actually taken off his suit in order to perform the photographic survey during this fly-around maneuver. We did see Aki off to the side, still in his suit, and like Gary just said, both Megan and Shane are still in their suits as well, in their seats.
And they'll be in this position for quite some time. So again, they're going to just remain really in a monitoring position, and with Thomas Pesquet with the handheld camera. So we'll continue to provide the coverage of that. And in fact, we're going to provide continuous coverage of the journey home. We'll be here for quite some time as we break out from the keep out sphere and the approach ellipsoid and start making some of those calculated burns. There are 4 burns to bring us home. The first 2 happen pretty shortly after the fly-around maneuver. There's no holding. It's just the fly-around happens around the space station, and then if they get the go, they'll execute the depart burn 0. You can see here's the entire maneuver from, and this is where we are right now after the 50-second burn, the first quadrant of the fly-around going from the zenith or the space-facing to the aftmost part. Well, each of these different points that you see, fly-around burns 2, 3, and 4 will be 50-second burns. It's the same maneuver for each of these different sections, with the Dragon pointing towards the International Space Station every step of the way. We should be getting the same Dragon Eye camera views whenever we can. We'll be getting the external camera views from the space station looking out at Dragon, so we should get some pretty good coverage.
Endeavour, SpaceX on the big loop. The aft waypoint has been reached.
Never copies, we see that.
And with the aft waypoint reached, it means we are in that burn. So the burn, the 50-second burn to get from the aftmost position to the nadirmost position, so you see on this graphic, fly-around burn 2 is now underway.
So if you just joined us, Crew Dragon Endeavour has departed the space station with an undocking separation at 11:05 a.m. Pacific. They have now moved away from station and have begun the fly-around maneuver, which is essentially a photographic survey of the station.
And we did get confirmation that the full 50-second burn, the second of 4 burns, has been completed. We have a good fly-around burn 2, or what's called the aft to nadir burn. So now we're in a cruise phase, and this cruise phase will take place for about 25 minutes. We'll be cruising from the very back of the station to the nadirmost point. We should be getting a sunrise here soon as well. In about 11 minutes, we should be getting a sunrise. So about halfway through, right about the position where you see the Dragon in this graphic, about halfway between the aftmost and the nadirmost point, will be about when we start seeing the sun rise and start to illuminate the underside of the International Space Station. So Thomas Pesquet should be getting some fantastic shots of that section.
As we've mentioned before, the blackout on the video feed is expected. We knew that this was going to happen a number of times throughout the Flyaround, partially due to ground station coverage. And when we get those views back, we will bring them back to you as soon as we have them as well. But unfortunately, right now we don't have those views inside Dragon or of station.
Now, we should be getting some from station, hopefully soon, and as well as the Dragon. You've been seeing them very, very sporadic through this maneuver, which is anticipated. There are some handovers. It's a very long maneuver, about an hour and a half to get from the very top of the station and make essentially what is a full loop. It's a whole hour and a half. So through that time, we'll make essentially what is a full orbit of the Earth. We undocked right over the South Pacific Ocean, I believe. And then right around the time that the Flyaround maneuver was executed, we were over the South Atlantic. So right about that time, we should be somewhere over the South Atlantic, right around the time the Flyaround is complete.
But in the meantime, let's learn a little bit about the crew on board, starting with our commander, Shane Kimbrough. He is the commander of Crew Dragon spacecraft and the Crew 2 mission. Kimbrough is responsible for all phases of flight from launch to re-entry. Selected as a NASA astronaut in 2004, Kimbrough first launched aboard Space Shuttle Endeavour for a visit to the station on the STS-126 mission in 2008, and then aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft for his first long-duration mission for Expedition 4950 in 2016. After 199 days in space during Expeditions 65 and 66, he has spent a total of 388 career days in space, the fourth highest for any U.S. astronaut, and performed 9 career spacewalks. Kimbrough is also a retired U.S. Army colonel and earned a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York, and a master's degree in operations research from the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta.
Megan MacArthur is the pilot of Crew Dragon spacecraft, and she's the second in command for the mission. MacArthur is responsible for spacecraft systems and performance. Expedition 65 and 66 was her very first trip to the International Space Station. She was selected as an astronaut in 2000, and MacArthur launched on the Space Shuttle Atlantis as a mission specialist on STS-125, which was the final Hubble Space Telescope surfacing mission in 2009. MacArthur operated the shuttle's robotic arm over the course of the 12 days, 21 hours that she spent in space on shuttle, capturing the telescope and moving the crew members during the 5 spacewalks needed to repair and upgrade the telescope. She holds a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a doctorate in oceanography from the University of California, San Diego. She now has a career of 212 days in space.
Akihiko Hoshide is a mission specialist for Crew 2. As a mission specialist, he works closely with the commander and pilot to monitor the spacecraft during dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. Hoshide joined the National Space Development Agency of Japan, NASDA, which is currently JAXA, in 1992, and was selected as an astronaut candidate in February 1999. Hoshide is a veteran of 2 spaceflights in addition to Expedition 65-66. In June 2008, he flew to the International Space Station on the STS-124 mission to deliver the Japanese experiment module Kibo to the station. From July to November 2012, he stayed on the space station for 124 days as a flight engineer for the Expedition 32-33 mission. The Crew Dragon will be the 3rd spacecraft that he has flown to the orbiting laboratory. He commanded the station for Expedition 65 and performed 1 spacewalk, bringing his career total to 4. He spent a total of 340 days in space on his 3 flights, 8 days short of Koichi Wakata's record-setting mark of 348 days in space by a Japanese astronaut.
Thomas Pesquet is also a mission specialist for Crew 2, working with the commander and pilot to monitor the spacecraft during the dynamic launch and re-entry phases of flight. He was selected as an astronaut candidate by ESA in May of 2009 and worked as a Eurocom, communicating with astronauts during space flights from the Mission Control Center. He previously flew as part of Expeditions 50 and 51, launching aboard a Russian Soyuz spacecraft in October 2016, and he spent 196 days in space, returning to Earth in June of 2017. His mission also included 2 spacewalks to maintain the station, one to replace batteries on an electrical channel, and one to detect a cooling leak and service the robotic arm. He performed an additional 4 spacewalks for Expeditions 65 and 66 to outfit the station with new solar arrays, bringing his career total spacewalk to 6. He commanded the station for part of Expedition 66 and has a career total of 395 days in space, the most amount of time in space by any European Space Agency astronaut.
So if you just joined, sorry, go ahead.
So we are now still in a fly-around position. We just passed the first quadrant of 4, detailing and surveying the first, quarter of the maneuver, which is the space-facing side to the aftmost portion. That covers a lot of the very top as well as the Russian segment. We are now essentially underneath the space station, and now with the external views of the space station cameras themselves, getting views of the Crew Dragon as we are still in an orbital nighttime, seeing the navigation lights as well as the little tiny hole in the middle where Thomas Pesquet is with a digital camera surveying the International Space Station, and we should be seeing sunrise soon, so hopefully we'll be getting some more illuminated views of Dragon as it continues this maneuver.
Yeah, so that small light that we saw is actually a small window located on the forward hatch. And like Gary said, that is the window that Thomas is utilizing in order to take the photographs for this survey of the station.
Dragon SpaceX, we see the onboard alert for Dragon Eye. No crew response at this time. We are still in the cruise state.
Endeavour copies.
So as I was saying, that's essentially a shot of the top of Dragon, and that small window is what the crew is using in order to perform this photographic survey that we're doing today on the Flyaround maneuver.
That's right, and we got 15 minutes just about of this quadrant of the Flyaround maneuver. In about 3 or 4 minutes, we should be seeing an orbital sunrise. So we'll see the views of the Dragon get a little bit brighter. And of course, from the inside of Dragon, the International Space Station will get a little brighter as well, making those photographs all the more useful.
SpaceX for awareness. Dragon I-1 time of flight has reconverged, but we will leave it on the board in case it loses convergence again.
Endeavour copy, thanks.
They're just watching that Dragon Eye. It's the forwardmost camera. So right from that little hatch window is where Thomas Pesquet is taking the digital photographs, but also on that same side is guidance navigation equipment called the Dragon Eye, which provides detailed survey or a detailed look and navigation guidance of the International Space Station, and really helps with this maneuver, relying on essentially watching the space station, making sure that it is in the predicted orientation, the predicted state as it makes its way through this fly-around maneuver.
Yeah. And as we mentioned before, the Flyaround is basically a photographic survey of the station with all of the recent additions to station. There are areas that the onboard cameras are unable to photograph, and the last fly-around maneuver was performed in 2018 by Soyuz. So this is the first time that we are executing the fly-around with the Crew Dragon, and Thomas Pesquet is the designated photographer, floating about in the cabin in any orientation he needs in order to get the photographs required in order to complete the survey.
Now, you see, when we get those views from inside the Dragon, we're seeing that the commander and pilot are still in place. They're still suited up. They're not pressurized. There's no need to. In fact, for nominal departure from the International Space Station, at this point, all the crew will have doffed their suits. But because we're inside the keep-out sphere and the commander and pilot are in the monitoring phase, they're just going to hang tight for at least an hour and a half and just take a look at all the different views. They're watching the Dragon Eye. They're watching the Dragon's orientation. They're watching the thrusters, making sure that the vehicle that they're flying right now, or rather that is flying them, is in a tip-top shape as they make their way through the maneuver. After the hour-and-a-half fly-around is done and they perform the two depart burns to break out of the keep-out sphere and the approach ellipsoid, at that time they'll be able to doff or take off their suits for a couple of hours, and they'll make sure that they're dry, and they'll put them in a temporary stowed position before they have to put them right back on again, because they have to get ready right before the trunk separation and cloth separation, put them right back on because there's very fast sequence of events that's going to happen. You're starting to see views of the Dragon now, and in the back is the trunk. The trunk will separate and then orient it for re-entry, and that very dynamic phase of flight, we will require the suits. Sunrise in orbit. We are seeing the Dragon capsule being illuminated by the first glimpses of sunlight. And we should be able to see, when we do get those views from Dragon looking down at the International Space Station, the station itself being illuminated by that light.
This is a great view of the forward hatch. Of course, the nose cone is configured into the open position, as we can see, but we can also see the 4 Draco thrusters located there on the forward hatch. These are what are utilized in order to move Dragon away from station. Those are the 4 larger circles in a rectangular shape there around the hatch.
Those forward bulkhead Dracos will perform some of the more important deorbit maneuvers, or departing and deorbit maneuvers, namely the deorbit burn, which is a 16.5-minute burn. Very, very essential that those forward bulkhead Dracos execute that maneuver. It commits them to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, aiming for what is the prime location now of Pensacola, Florida. Very shortly after that 16.5-minute burn, it will only take a couple of minutes for the nose cone, which you're seeing opened up here from this view at the very top portion of your screen. That will only take a couple of minutes to close and protect some of those critical components, including the docking mechanism, the forward bulkhead Dracos, some of the guidance and navigation equipment. But for the most part, during this flight, the nose cone will remain open.
And of course, this camera that we have here keeps having to readjust because Crew Dragon is currently performing one big loop of the station. And of course, the camera has to readjust in order to keep Dragon in its views. Just coasting away.
We're in this cruise phase for a little less than 10 minutes. Until we execute the 3rd of 4 fly-around burns. This will take us from the nadir, or the very bottom portion of the International Space Station, in between the station and the Earth. Another 50-second burn to bring it to the very forward end.
As we mentioned before, Megan and Shane are still in their suits and buckled into their seats. However, Thomas Pesquet is taking photos for this fly-around maneuver, and Aki is also out of his seat assisting Thomas to take these photos. as Gary mentioned before, the crew will be taking off their suit in a little while to get comfortable. And it's not really a break period, but it is a small break in the action before the dynamic events pick back up again prior to re-entry. But these spacesuits are custom fitted for each astronaut. They go through a series of checkouts prior to leaving the station, and so they'll do the same once again when they put the suits back on. But as you mentioned before, we saw Thomas get out of his suit pretty quickly. Actually, I was really surprised to see how fast he popped back up on screen, ready to begin the fly-around maneuver and begin using that DSLR camera to take photos. And yeah, so each of these suits are custom fitted for each individual astronaut. So there's no option to switch around.
You are committed to a suit.
Yeah.
All right, we got a little less than 10 minutes of this cruise phase until we execute that other burn. There's two more. One that brings us from the bottom portion, the nadir position, over to the forward position. Through the remainder of this fly around, we should be in daylight. So we'll get fantastic views of both the Dragon and the International Space Station as we acquire the signals from space to go ahead and provide that to you. But again, Thomas Pesquet will be photographing the station. At this point of the journey, there is a chance that Mark Vande Hei on board the International Space Station is inside the cupola, and we'll be able to capture some images from the Dragon. Now getting views from inside Dragon. The cabin lights are still off to reduce the glare from the window which Thomas Pesquet is at, to allow him to take some photos of the International Space Station. Very, very clear. Now we're getting the views of the Dragon from the space station. Absolutely beautiful. We're now over the North Pacific Ocean, about 260 statute miles. We just passed over the east coast of Japan.
In this view here, we have a great shot of the forward hatch with that nose cone open, as we've said before. And if you're looking closely, you might see there's a great side-by-side there of the station and Dragon looking back at each other. And that view of Dragon, you can actually see the fins of the Dragon trunk. So if you were wondering what from this angle might have looked like little spikes coming out from the side of Dragon, they look like spikes from this angle, but they're actually fins that are built into the trunk section or the unpressurized section of Crew Dragon. That trunk will be jettisoned prior to the capsule coming back. Once that trunk is jettisoned, that will expose the heat shield, which is, of course, what we need in order to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and splash down.
That heat shield has the very important job of slowing the Dragon from what is essentially 17,000 miles per hour to about 350 miles per hour. A ton of energy, as the Dragon itself is really engulfed in plasma that's reducing that speed quite drastically. Once it gets down to 350 miles per hour, it's really up to the parachutes in the atmosphere itself to slow Dragon down through a series of drogue and main parachutes down to a mere 15, 16 miles per hour before it splashes down off the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, while the temperatures near the heat shield can get close to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The inside of the cabin stays a pretty comfortable temperature. The crews that we have brought back home have indicated that it's actually a pretty comfortable ride in Crew Dragon during that descent phase.
Wonderful side-by-side views. We're getting feeds from both the Dragon and the International Space Station. From the Space Station view, you're seeing the underside as the Dragon spacecraft, you can see, is wedged between the space station and the Earth. And by wedged, I mean there's a 250-mile distance between those two things. But right now, the Dragon is about 200 meters from the International Space Station. And we're seeing some of the features now. Cabin lights inside Dragon, as we get some of those feeds as well, still turned off, allowing the photographs to be taken of the space station, part of this photographic survey of the exterior. And of course, we're getting wonderful views from the station, looking down at the Dragon capsule. Right below them, 259 statute miles, is the North Pacific Ocean.
Endeavour SpaceX on the Big Loop. Nadir waypoint has been reached.
And Endeavour copies.
And we're now directly beneath the International Space Station, the Nadir waypoint. We are now executing a 50-second burn to maneuver from the Nadir point, or the Earth-facing side of the space station, over to the forward end. And that burn is in progress. And that 50-second burn is complete. You can see we're essentially right below the International Space Station. And we're getting some great coverage, both from the space station side using TDRS satellites, as well as the Dragon spacecraft. Right below the Dragon spacecraft, you were seeing some of the coastline of the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean.
Once again, the Dragon Endeavour spacecraft is basically directly below the station at this point in time. We are executing a fly-around maneuver, which is essentially one big loop around the space station. And the reason for doing this is we're doing a photographic survey of the station, thanks to the several new installations on station over the last few years. The last fly-around maneuver was performed in 2018, and unfortunately, just because of positioning of some of those onboard cameras on station, they can't quite see everything. So this photographic survey will help fill in some of those blanks of the exterior of the station. So we're about halfway through the maneuver. Once again, we are directly below the station. And Thomas Pesquet, the designated photographer on board today, is taking photos actually right through that small white hole there in the center of the hatch. So what we saw there is the forward hatch, and that small white light is a little window there in the forward hatch, and Thomas Pesquet is taking photos out of that hatch of the station to complete this photographic survey.
On board the International Space Station, Mark Vande Hei, the sole NASA astronaut on board the orbiting laboratory, has been relieved of the duties to monitor the undocking and retreat of the SpaceX Dragon and the Endeavour crew inside, but now is in a position inside the cupola. He mentioned he was going to go over with a digital camera from his side and take some wonderful photographs of the crew during their fly-around maneuver. The cupola faces towards the Earth and provides some fantastic views of the planet as they orbit the Earth every 90 minutes. It's also used for some operational reasons, like capturing spacecraft. From inside the cupola, they're able to control the station's robotic arm and get a good view of some of the spacecraft that they're capturing.
As Gary mentioned before, the remainder of the fly-around maneuver should be in orbital daylight. And while it was pretty cool to have the nighttime photos, because we could actually see the pulses from the Draco thrusters as that was occurring, got to say these daylight views are pretty breathtaking.
And we'll see them for the remainder of the fly-around. Some Pacific Island chains that we're seeing as we head on a southeasterly course down the Pacific Ocean, heading towards the South Pacific. We'll make our way up and cross over the South America as we continue the fly-around maneuver.
If you've just recently joined us, the Crew 2 crew is on board Crew Dragon Endeavour, which we just had a view of moments ago. They have departed the space station. They had an on-time separation at 11:05 a.m. Pacific, and they are currently executing a fly-around maneuver around the station. And after that, they will be executing 4 burns, essentially, a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers in order to put Dragon on a trajectory back home. We are anticipating a splashdown at 7:33 p.m. Pacific time this evening, just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida.
We're getting high-definition views from the International Space Station. These cameras on a camera assembly, which includes high-definition and standard-definition views, as well as the ability to manually control each of the individual cameras that are positioned on the station's truss. There is a single position inside Mission Control Houston now, the Cronus position, a person who is literally on the ground in Houston, manually controlling each of these views. The Cronus has full autonomy to position the cameras wherever is needed to get views of the action. In this case is the fly-around of Crew 2 and Dragon Endeavour around the International Space Station. Earlier you were seeing that same console position adjust the exposure or the aperture of some of the cameras, which allows the some of the plumes coming from the Draco thrusters to be seen as the image is overexposed. But in this scenario with the daylight, we can very clearly see the Dragon making its way to the forward end of the station. And we're seeing some features of the space station itself. Right now you're seeing on the very bottom left of your screen the gem. This is the Cronus. This is the individual, the Cronus. He's actually sitting there controlling the cameras on the International Space Station. Not a bad job to have. As he's using some of the truss cameras, they're high definition, to check out some of these views. This is the Japanese module. You can see on the very right the flag of Japan clearly marked on that module. Right above that, towards the space-facing side, is the logistics module, essentially the storage area. And then the Japanese module has its own airlock to put out experiments. It's too small to fit humans. We have bigger airlocks for that. But this airlock is small enough to fit some of the payloads or experiments, many of which you see on this external platform, each with their own grappling fixture to allow the robotic arm to maneuver it wherever it needs to go. One of the experiments on that external platform is called the OCO3, or the Orbital Carbon Observatory 3. As the space station covers about 85% of the inhabited Earth, that one of the experiments is looking down at the Earth, monitoring carbon all across the planet. We're seeing that external facility as well as the Dragon come into the forward end of the International Space Station, hovering about 200 meters away. Fantastic views all around.
And as we've mentioned earlier, the whole point for doing this fly-around maneuver essentially is to take pictures of the station. There have been a number of new installations put on station since the last fly-around maneuver, and so this is a great opportunity to document the exterior of the station, basically do a photographic survey, and be able to see parts of the station that some of the onboard cameras might not be able to reach. If you look closely, you can still see Dragon. They're just kind of off to the right-hand, slightly right of center.
Yeah, you got to squint.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see a little bit of there, pretty much directly in the center of the screen now. Gary, a lot of what you just mentioned about all the different modules and components of the space station really highlight the first and possibly the most important thing about the space station is that it is international. It is the International Space Station, and all of these experiments and modules are a really great representation of teamwork. Also represented by our crew members on board today. We have JAXA astronaut Aki Hoshide, European Space Agency astronaut Thomas Pesquet, and of course, two NASA astronauts, Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur. So it's a great demonstration of international effort.
And cooperation, really. You were seeing some of the features on the space station themselves, modules owned and operated by different space agencies. We even have commercial modules as we're transitioning to enable commercial activities in low Earth orbit, all enabled by this orbiting complex. Now getting some fantastic brand new views from the Dragon crew, taking photos of the outside all along the way, being able to capture for history this moment in time, 2021, as we have new modules that have been added since the last photographic survey, which happened in 2018 aboard a Russian Soyuz. We added some commercial modules, some international and commercial partnerships, namely the commercial module being the Nanoracks Bishop airlock, and then that international commercial partnership being the Bartolomeo platform, an external platform on the Columbus side, which we haven't seen. We've seen the external platform on the Japanese side, but from this view, now that the Dragon is approaching the very forward end of the International Space Station, which it should be getting to here momentarily, about 10 minutes. This is approximately the position where the Dragon is now, a little more than halfway to the very forward position, but right about that position, they should be getting some very good views of some of those new modules, including and platforms, including Bartolomeo. And this will be the first time that we've had views like this of Bartolomeo as part of an external survey, part of the ever-evolving International Space Station.
So they're a great shot looking top down from the station at Dragon. As the what appears to us as the bottom part of Crew Dragon comes into view, you can actually see the side hatch door, which is where the crew entered into the capsule 199 days ago when they launched from Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center. That hatch has been closed since, and it will reopen tonight once after they splash down off the coast of Florida. And that will, once that side hatch opens, that will basically be their first breath of fresh air since launching almost 200 days ago.
I bet they are very excited to see their families once again. It won't be long until they are recovered by the SpaceX recovery teams. They're joint with NASA and as well as some European doctors. It truly is an international effort, even out in the middle of the Gulf, to recover some of these crew. But it won't be long until they're flown back to shore. They'll have planes stationed for them, ready to get them back home to see their respective families.
That is an incredible shot there of the earthly horizon with Crew Dragon rising above.
Bonus points to Cronus.
Somebody at Houston, please give him a gold star.
It's a very slow and calculated maneuver. You can see all along the way, now that we have the view of the Dragon against the blackness of space with the overexposed camera views from the station cameras, you can see that all along the way, the Draco thrusters have been firing to continue to keep Dragon in the intended position. All along the way, we've been seeing essentially the same view, much like we see the moon, right? We always see the same face of the moon anywhere it is in the sky. We are seeing the same face of the forward end of the Dragon, as it is critical that we have that same hatch with the windows facing this way to allow Thomas Pesquet to continue his photographic survey. It's only a few more minutes that we're in this phase, which is the cruise phase between the nadir and the forward positions. Once we meet that forward position on the V-bar, the velocity bar, essentially directly in front of the International Space Station, Dragon will automatically execute a 50-second burn, the final fly-around burn, the fourth of four, to move it from the forward end back to the zenith end, effectively doing a full loop around the International Space Station. The last quadrant from there are two departure burns where the Dragon and the crew will break away from this fly-around position about 200 meters from the International Space Station and start exiting the keep-out sphere, the sphere which it's essentially been hugging for this entire maneuver, about a 200-meter circle around the space station. It'll exit the keep-out sphere and then the approach ellipsoid. There we have a graphic as we're getting dual views of both the Dragon capsule as well as the maneuver itself. You can see we are in the third cruise phase of four. Very shortly we'll be executing that fourth burn maneuver. You can see at the far left of the graphic, that's the fourth maneuver. It's directly in front of the International Space Station. It's at that position where that fourth burn maneuver is executed. That is where the Crew 3 Dragon and the Endurance crew will be heading in just a couple of days to the forward end to meet up with the docking axis of the forward port of the space station and move into dock for their 6-month stay. After that 50-second burn, that is the last cruise phase. They'll meet up with the same point where they started, which is essentially on the R bar, or it's a vertical line right through the middle of the space station, where the Dragon will automatically execute the depart burns, which you can see on the graphic there, depart burn 0 and depart burn 1 to get it outside the approach ellipsoid. It's a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 4 kilometer oval shape that's around the space station. And once it exits there, we'll stop joint operations between the station and Dragon mission control teams. And from there on, it's really Mission Control Hawthorne that's taking the Crew 2 Endeavour astronauts home back to planet Earth.
The teams here in Mission Control Hawthorne have been busy over the last several days in preparation for Dragon's departure and, of course, the intended launch of the Crew 3 crew. So it's been pretty busy here trying to juggle the opportunities to both return crew and launch crew. Of course, if you've been following along, weather has up until this point not been playing very nice with us. But fortunately, we do have an opportunity. Obviously, as we have undocked, we do have an opportunity to splash down today, return the Crew 2 crew home, and we're expecting that splashdown to occur at 7:33 p.m. Pacific time. And while it is preferred that we launch the next crew prior to bringing the previous crew home, just because of those weather conditions and limited opportunities for splashdown going forward later in the week, the teams jointly decided, both SpaceX and NASA worked together to determine that the best course of action for both crews was to bring Crew 2 folks home prior to letting the Crew 3 launch proceed.
That's right, Kate. And as you mentioned, the reason that we're seeing Crew 2 Endeavour in this position right now is we've done several weather briefings throughout the week. We did one immediately before docking. We want to make sure that the weather at the landing site, the prime site, which is Pensacola, Florida, for today, is looking good, and it continues to look good. We'll continue to hear weather updates through the entire phase of flight, all the way down through just before committing to that deorbit burn. We'll do another weather briefing just to make sure that everything down in the Gulf looks A-OK. And part of the reason that we're seeing this today is because it really does look like the best opportunity for the crews. Again, along the eastern seaboard and the ascent corridor for Crew 3 not looking as great, but the Gulf looks pretty good. So we transition to an indirect handover to allow Crew 2 to splash down first because the weather is looking so good.
Live view there on your screen now, coming from the International Space Station as Crew Dragon has departed and is in the final phases of completing the Flyaround maneuver, which is basically a photographic survey of the exterior of the space station. And like I said, we're coming close to the end of that maneuver, and we had some great views there. We do expect the video feed to come in and out occasionally just due to ground station coverage. However, we'll bring those views back to you now that we're in daylight once again. As you just saw moments ago, we have some pretty incredible shots.
We're in the final minutes of that third cruise phase between the nadir side, or the bottom portion, to the very forward end of the International Space Station. It's really a matter of moments at this point before we hear that the Dragon and the crew, here we go.
Endeavour SpaceX on the big loop. The forward waypoint has been reached.
Endeavour copies forward waypoint.
And with that forward waypoint reached, the Dragon is automatically executing a 50-second burn, now in progress. It's the final fly-around burn for today. It should be a matter of moments until it's complete, and there it is. Looks like the fly-around burn, the 50-second burn, is complete, so that's it. That is the final.
Fly-around is done.
They still have that cruise phase of the final quadrant. That's at the forward end to the zenith end, so they'll be able to survey the very forward end of the space station. They'll get a good look at the forward docking port where Crew 3 is going to be docking to in a couple of days here. They'll be able to see the Japanese module, the European module, and you can see they'll see a lot of the United States orbiting segment, which includes a lot of the U.S. modules as well. And they'll, of course, see the back of the Russian modules, but they were already surveyed as part of burns 1 through 3. That's the final burn. So they're now in the cruise phase, and they'll continue to drift for the next about 20, 25 minutes until they reach that depart burn 0. It'll be essentially at the same point where that first fly-around burn was executed, right in that same position. The difference here is it'll be executing a departure burn, which means it'll break away from the keep out sphere, which it's been pretty much hugging through this whole fly-around maneuver, about 200 meters from the International Space Station, and then execute another one to exit the approach ellipsoid, which is an imaginary marker that will effectively end joint operations between the Mission Control Houston and Mission Control Hawthorne. Although Houston will be monitoring along the way, it's really up to the Dragon teams here in Hawthorne to carry the crew home.
There on your screen, while the shot was still overexposed, and just a little bit now as well, you can actually see the Draco thrusters firing, which of course are allowing Dragon to hold its position during this very carefully choreographed maneuver around the station.
Again, it's about 20 to 25 minutes that the Dragon will be in this drifting phase. And like Kate said, we'll see the Draco engines firing along the way just to keep it in that same orientation, making sure that forward end, the open hatch that you can see there, that's where the Dragon was docked to the station for 197 days. And it's also at the very center of which you can see sort of a light at the very center of that docking port or the hatch. That's where Thomas Pesquet is taking some of those photos. He's got about 20 to 25 minutes left of this before the Dragon automatically executes a departure burn 0. The entire way should be in daylight, so we should be seeing great views as long as we have coverage, right? We need the geosynchronous satellites, the TDRS satellites, to provide some of those high bandwidth views, to provide these high definition camera views from the station looking at Dragon. We may even see some of the similar views from Dragon looking at station. But it's about 20-25 minutes until we get to that point. Dragon will automatically execute depart burn 0 and 1, and all crew members, including Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur, who I believe are still in their SpaceX launch and entry suits in the commander and pilot seat monitoring this entire maneuver, they'll be able to take a short break, doff their suits for just a little bit, just a couple of hours, until they have to put them back on again, getting ready for the final phase of flight, which is the dynamic part of the flight. It is the deorbit burn and the entry into Earth's atmosphere, slowing down Dragon from 17,000 miles per hour to a mere 350 miles an hour.
If you've just joined us recently, the Crew Dragon Endeavour spacecraft has departed the space station, had an on-time separation at 11:05 a.m. Pacific. It is nearly done with the fly-around maneuver around the space station as a photographic survey, and we are one step closer to bringing the Crew 2 crew back home to Earth later this evening, expecting a splashdown off the coast of Pensacola, Florida at 7:33 p.m. Pacific.
That's right. We're in the final stretch, about a little less than 10 minutes remaining in this cruise phase. There were 4 burns that were executed, 50 seconds each, at each quadrant of the Flyaround, starting at the zenith-most or the space-facing side of the International Space Station. The zenith port on the Harmony module has been the home of Crew Dragon Endeavour for the International Space Station, attached for the past 197 days. It backed away, making its way from the docking position out to waypoint 1, about 220 meters away from the International Space Station, into a hold position. And it was really a matter of seconds that the pilot, Megan MacArthur, on board the Crew Dragon Endeavour, executed the first fly-around burn, initiated Dragon to automatically enter into its fly-around sequence. Again, 50-second burns each at each quadrant around the International Space Station, starting at the very top and working its way towards the back of the station and making its way around. We're now in the final 10 minutes in the cruise phase at the forward-most port, making its way back to the very top, essentially the starting position where we were just an hour and a half ago. As I mentioned, during this hour-and-a-half long maneuver, the Dragon and the International Space Station have orbited the Earth one time. So we started over the South Atlantic Ocean, and we are now again over the South Atlantic Ocean. We're about to cross over the terminator line, which is the line between orbital daytime and orbital darkness. That'll be essentially the final end, or the end of the fly-around maneuver, and right about at about depart burn 0, which is the first departure burn of 5 departure burn 0, 1, 2, 3 to get us outside the International Space Station, roughly co-elliptic with the International Space Station, followed by a 5th burn called the departure phase burn. That'll take us outside of the same plane of the station and line up with the landing location that is Pensacola, Florida.
All the meanwhile, ESA astronaut Thomas Pesquet has been taking photographs basically out of that small white light that you see there at the top of Dragon. Well, it is the top, but to us it looks like it's the middle. That is essentially the middle of the forward hatch. It's a small window, and Thomas Pesquet has been basically positioned right there near the hatch with a camera and taking photographs through the hatch, that hatch window of the station throughout the duration of this fly-around maneuver. NASA astronauts Commander Shane Kimbrough and pilot Megan MacArthur have remained in their suits and in their seats throughout this time to monitor progress and position. And Thomas and Aki had the opportunity to actually hop out of their seats. Thomas took off his suit to allow better mobility and has been doing this photo documentation of the exterior of the space station for, as you said, Gary, the last hour and a half or so.
So we're in the final stretch here, just a few more minutes until we get to the very top, or the R-bar. Is essentially an invisible vertical line that goes right through the middle of the space station. That is where Dragon will automatically execute the first of 5 departure burns. You see departure burn 0 there at the very top, right in line with where that first fly-around burn was executed. That was a 50-second burn. Departure burn 0 is a little shorter. It's about 15 seconds. Its job is to take Dragon outside of the keep-out sphere. The keep-out sphere is, you can see, almost a perfect circle. It's a 200-meter radius around the outside of the International Space Station, and that is what Dragon has been following. It's been pretty much 200 meters the whole way, give or take a little bit of oscillation in either direction, but for the most part, it's been following that line. Now we're just minutes away from executing that departure burn 0. That'll be an automatic maneuver to get our crew members home. And Kate, as you said, the commander and pilot have been suited up, monitoring this entire procedure really just not having the time to get out. But after this, after the departure burns, actually departure burn 1, I believe, once they're outside the approach ellipsoid, they'll have a chance to doff or take off their spacesuits for just a little bit before they have to put them back on again. It'll be about that time where they'll have the ability to have a crew meal, get some food in them.
Endeavour SpaceX on the big loop. The forward waypoint has been reached. Departure burn 0 is in progress.
Endeavour copies. We see depart 0 burn.
And you heard confirmation that that depart 0 burn has started. It's also just in time ended. It's only a 15-second burn, very short, to allow the Dragon to exit the keep out sphere, which we'll be hearing confirmation of here momentarily.
As I've mentioned before, Hawthorne here is an active production facility, so we've got some...
SpaceX departure burn 0 was nominal.
Copy, nominal burn.
All right, good call out there indicating that the first of the 5 burns that we're going to execute today was nominal. Again, that was a 15-second burn known as departure burn 0. Again, that is the first of 5.
It's about 5 minutes from the next departure burn 1, the second in a series of 5 that brings the Crew Dragon Endeavour back home to Earth right before that deorbit burn. It's a very critical burn that'll be that final 16.5-minute burn of the forward Dracos that'll slow Dragon down enough so that it enters the Earth's atmosphere. The Earth's atmosphere doing most of the legwork to slow Dragon down to a reasonable speed. Right now, traveling at about 6...
Suit docking procedure and audio config complete.
SpaceX copies on Dragon to ground. Suit doffing and audio configuration procedure is complete.
All right, so good call out there. Suit doffing, that simply means taking the suit off. So Aki, Shane, and Megan will now be, or have taken their suits off. Thomas already had his removed because he removed it prior to beginning the Flyaround maneuver.
So they should be outside the keep out sphere at this point as well. They're just minutes away from the second departure burn. That'll be depart burn 1. Depart burn 1 is a little bit longer, 21 seconds long, but its job is to increase the distance from between the International Space Station and the Crew Dragon. You can see there, it's a burn that just slows it down, and orbital mechanics does the rest, allowing the Dragon to reduce its altitude, and by doing so, it exits the approach ellipsoid. It's a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer oval shape. Once it exits from there, the crew will be outside of joint operations. So the Houston teams and Hawthorne teams will now be, they don't need to do the joint operations anymore. Once we were inside the vicinity of the International Space Station, which was really that entire fly-around maneuver, each of the teams was carefully monitoring that procedure. But once you're outside the approach ellipsoid, it's really up to the Dragon teams here in Hawthorne that you're seeing on your screen. These teams will be the one to carry the crew home for the next few hours until we splash down 7:33 p.m. Pacific time, 10:33 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, now, like we said before, these departure burns that we're executing, a total of 5, it's all a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers in order to safely move Dragon away from station and essentially put it on a trajectory back home to Earth. Like we said before, we're going to splash down off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. But if you're familiar with how long it takes to get to station, you might have noticed by now that it's a lot faster to leave station than it is to approach it. So at this point in our journey today, we're kind of back into what you might consider like a regular departure from station. That fly-around maneuver was a special one, like we said before, just a photo documentation of the exterior of the station. So at this point in time, we have kind of moved back into those maneuvers that we have seen previously on Crew Dragon departures from station. And like I said before, total of 5, and it's a lot faster to leave than it is to arrive.
There are some trajectories that take about 18 or 19 hours. That would have been approximately what we would have looked at if we were to depart yesterday. But again, we are constantly monitoring weather. We were looking at some of the splashdown zones. There are 7 identified splashdown zones around the coast of Florida that we were looking at, and weather just wasn't cooperating for us. Some of the wind speeds were a little on the high end, so we deferred to today, did the same exact thing, did a brief of the weather, making sure that everything was good, and then prior to undocking today, did a final weather brief to say, are we good to undock and splash down off the coast of Florida? The answer was yes. That is not the final decision, right? There is a scenario where we could use some of these departure burns.
SpaceX on the big loop. Depart 1 burn is complete and nominal. Reminder that the ground will be deactivating the big loop following exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Endeavour copies all.
There you go. A good depart burn 1. That is a critical burn, and you can see a lot's happening after that burn. Now that that burn has been executed, it really increases the distance between the Crew Dragon and the space station, a 21-second burn. You heard that the crew themselves have already doffed their suits, so they don't need it anymore for this phase of flight. But once we are outside the approach ellipsoid, which is a 4-kilometer by 2-kilometer by 2-kilometer oval shape, we'll be outside of joint operations, which we're currently in now. So you have this Houston teams, you have the International Space Station, Dragon, and Hawthorne all on the same communication loop called the Big Loop. Once we're outside that approach ellipsoid, which we should be very shortly now that we've executed Depart Burn 1, we'll take down that loop and we'll just be hearing Dragon grounds from here on out.
Yeah. So as Gary said, we're now waiting for Dragon to exit that approach ellipsoid, or AE, as you might hear it referred to as. And like we said, that's another imaginary shape. This time a 3-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. And it's in the same family as the keep-out sphere. But one of the key differences with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. So that basically means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for for at least 24 hours. And again, even if it lost all maneuvering, even if it lost all that maneuvering. So listen in for that call out once we hear confirmation that Dragon is outside of the approach ellipsoid, which we're expecting any moment.
This is a very choreographed, we'll call it a dance, right? Every moment counts. You heard, even as we were undocking from the space station and getting towards that hold point, waypoint 1, which is on the edge of the keep-out sphere, and was really important to make sure that we were ready to execute that fly-around maneuver. It was really moments. We have to execute it in a series of moments because we're timed perfectly, where all we have to do is just a couple second bursts here and there, right? We heard departure burn 0, which is a 15-second burst, departure burn 1, which is a 21-second burst. All of these are very carefully choreographed to maximize fuel efficiency, making sure that we're not burning like crazy. But as Kate, as you said, in the scenario now that we've done this Depart Burn 1, in the scenario, if we were to, for whatever reason, lose all control of those Draco thrusters, we know that the trajectory, now that that burn is complete, would take the Dragon outside of the approach ellipsoid, and we can pause there for at least 24 hours. Like, that was the safe trajectory, was 24 hours. We can pause there for a while to assess the problem, figure out how to recover Draco's thrusters, and then, of course, we could stay there for a couple of days. The crew on Dragon has meals for at least 3 days to find different landing opportunities, assess weather, all part of the backup plans that are necessary for taking a crew home from the International Space Station.
Yeah, and like we mentioned before, we are expecting to bring the crew home today. We're anticipating a splashdown of 7:33 p.m. Pacific time, and they'll be splashing down off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. So as we've said a couple of times, weather has been the primary watch item, forcing us to wave off an attempt yesterday. Like Gary mentioned earlier, that would have been an 18-hour journey home. Today, it's really only about 8 hours. So I imagine that the crew themselves are excited that they have more time on station with their pals on station, and now they have a shorter journey to head home and splash down in the Gulf Coast.
Now, you say shorter, Kate, but it is a number of hours, and we're going to be here with you the entire time until they splash down at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time, which is a little bit more than 6 hours from now. So that's a lot, and we'll be here with you the entire way. So during that journey, we'll be giving you periodic updates of the crew. Now that the Flyaround maneuver has been completed, that was pretty dynamic. We were getting some pretty fantastic views. But now things are going to be a little bit more spaced out. Again, conserving those departure burns, making sure that we're maximizing the fuel efficiency and staying right on target. So in the meantime, over the next 6 hours or so, we'll answer as many questions as we can from you. We want to make this an interactive program. So if you want to ask a question to us, use the hashtag #AskNASA, and we'll do our very best to answer as many of them as we can in between some of these very important phases of flight. Of course, the next one coming up is the exit of the approach ellipsoid. So while we wait for a confirmation of that exit, let's go ahead and take a couple of questions. The first one that I see is coming from Netta, who's asking the very existential question of what is space weather? What is weather? Space weather, funny enough, you think about weather, you think rain, you think thunder, you think wind, a lot of the things that we see on the ground. There is such a thing as space weather. It's not quite as or what you would think of as weather here on Earth, but the main thing you have to look out for space weather is cosmic rays. Cosmic particles are coming from the sun at all times, and there are, of course, solar events that can happen. In fact, we had one just, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, where there was a solar particle event. We're monitoring that, looking at all the systems and how that can affect satellites or, the International Space Station. Another one is galactic cosmic rays. These are general radiation events that are happening all across the galaxy, and of course we are looking at those as well. So weather, just like on Earth, in space can be a little bit unpredictable, so we just have to react in time. And so yeah, space weather is one of those things that we are constantly looking at. These are fantastic questions, and we're going to try to continue to answer them here as part of our continuous coverage until we have splashdown. So keep using that hashtag #AskNASA. We'll do the very best that we can for you. We have one more. Let's see. Hashtag #AskNASA. This one says NASA SpaceX Crew 2 returns home. Hatch closure of the Crew Dragon spacecraft on YouTube. What kind of solar power does the International Space Station have to sustain a crew like that? Very good question. Lots of solar power. It's a very good observation. The International Space Station is completely solar powered. There are 8 sets of gigantic solar arrays that are providing more than 200 kilowatts of power to really power the entire International Space Station. Just like solar arrays on Earth, solar arrays on station don't last forever. So we've seen a little bit of degradation over the 20 years at this point that the solar arrays have been in orbit. So right now we are undergoing a series of spacewalks to upgrade some of those solar arrays, and as you can imagine, solar array technology increases as time goes on. So just recently, the Crew 2 astronauts who are on board the International Space Station right now, Shane Kimbrough and Thomas Pesquet, did a spacewalk during their 6 months on board the International Space Station to outfit and install brand new solar arrays on the port truss, the far port truss, that's port 6. On the very, if you're looking at the space station, the left side, or looking at from the behind the space station, there's 2 new solar arrays out there. They're called ISS rollout solar arrays, and they'll continue to provide power for some of the critical items on board the International Space Station. We'll continue those power upgrades for the next couple of years to make sure that station continues to operate as we enter this 3rd decade of utilization, science, and even more exciting commercialization. We're seeing a lot of unique activities on board the International Space Station. Very good question.
One more question coming to us from Oliver. How long will it take for this Dragon unit to be reusable? That is a great question. As you noted, reusability is super important. Actually, this Dragon capsule was previously used on the Demo 2 mission, for which flew, of course, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley on basically the initial crew flight for Crew Dragon. And so this capsule was actually reused. I believe it was in August of 2020 that mission splashed down. And then this mission launched just a couple months ago. So kind of get a feel for how long it took to reuse this capsule. However, this was the first time that we did go through the reuse process on a Crew Dragon capsule. Took a lot of our learnings from the cargo program and the reusability there. So each time we reuse a capsule, it gets more efficient and takes less time. So I'm not sure which capsule this one will be assigned to in the future. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it will certainly only be a matter of a couple of months for the team to actually ready the hardware. And then after that, it's just a mission timeline. But fun fact about this capsule, as we mentioned before, Megan MacArthur is the pilot of this capsule for Crew 2, which we mentioned earlier is named Endeavour. Her husband, Bob Behnken, was also the pilot, sitting in the same position seat for the Demo 2 mission. So I'm sure Bob is super excited to get Megan back home.
Thanks, Endeavour on Dragon to ground for cameras.
Speaking of Megan, that's her voice now.
Endeavour, this is SpaceX MD standing in for Core. Go ahead.
Hey, MD, just like to ask you to step outside for a few minutes while we take care of hygiene.
Copy that. We'll put that in work.
All right, so just a call there asking to turn off the internal cameras on board Crew Dragon, just as the crew takes their suits off and prepares for a little bit of a rest period. As I was saying, I'm sure Bob is super excited to have Megan home. He knows exactly what she has gone through, also being the pilot for the Demo 2 mission that this capsule specifically was reused on. So like we mentioned before, we want to get through as many questions as we can, so be sure to use the hashtag #AskNASA.
No response required. Cameras are external.
All right. And then just a confirmation of that request coming from Dragon. As we mentioned before, when the ground teams are communicating with the capsule, there is a procedure of calling out. So we hear that Quindar tone first, and then the destination of the call. So in that case, Megan was calling the teams here in Hawthorne, calling out ground or SpaceX. Excuse me, yeah, they called out SpaceX to basically call here, Mission Control Hawthorne, and make that request.
All right, as we await the exit of the approach ellipsoid, let's take one more question from hashtag #AskNASA. This comes from the launch pad. How long before splashdown do we normally see deorbit burn? A very good question. We've been talking about how each of these burns are very carefully choreographed, so the burn itself has to be executed at the precise moment before the splashdown is predicted. So when we say 7:33 p.m. Pacific time, 10:33 p.m. Eastern time, that's what we mean. So it'll be precisely 53 minutes before that time, before that splashdown time, that will execute the deorbit burn. The deorbit burn varies based on the trajectory that is predicted. So for this very short transit from the undocking port of the, or from the docking port of the space station down to the coast of Florida off the Gulf. That will be about a 16.5-minute burn. So not only is the timing have to be precise, but the burn itself has to burn for that long to make sure that the maneuver is very carefully executed. Very good questions, and we'll continue to answer them as much as we can throughout our continuous coverage as we get towards that point, just about 6 hours from now. So stay with us using the hashtag AskNASA, and we'll be providing some periodic updates, namely confirming the exited the approach ellipsoid here soon. We'll be back with you.
Endeavour SpaceX on the big loop. Dragon has exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a safe free drift trajectory. Houston will be taking down the big loop shortly. Expect ISS audio traffic to cease. Request that you swap your audio destination to Dragon to ground and contact ground post-swap for a comm check on DG.
Copy all.
And with that, the Dragon and the crew have exited the approach ellipsoid. So now that they've exited the approach ellipsoid, or the AE, which is another imaginary shape, this time a three-dimensional ellipsoid measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers.
SpaceX Endeavour, comm check on Dragon to ground.
SpaceX has you loud and clear, Endeavour.
We have you loud and clear as well. Thank you.
That was Commander Shane Kimbrough inside the Dragon, confirming that communication check. Now that they have exited the approach ellipsoid, they are no longer on the big loop, which is a joint communication loop between the Hawthorne teams and the teams in Houston, as well as the astronauts on board the International Space Station. So now, with that comm check, they are ready to go. Again, that approach ellipsoid measures 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers. It's in the same family as the keep-out sphere, which they've been hovering through most of the flyover maneuver, or fly-around maneuver. One key difference, though, with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. You heard that confirmed over the loops. This means the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours, even if it lost all of maneuvering. So it's going to be some time until we get to the next departure burn. It's about 40 minutes, and that's the third departure burn, called Departure Burn 2. The thrusters used are a combination of the service section and the forward bulkhead Dracos. It's a longer burn than we've seen with some of the previous 2 departure burns, the first being 15 seconds, departure burn 1 being 21 seconds. This departure burn 2 is 44 seconds. So it's done at the orbital apogee, and it lowers the Dragon's perigee to below the space station to start bringing it beneath and in front of the station's orbit. Once you decrease the altitude of the Dragon, orbital mechanics does the rest, and you actually end up passing the space station. You're going what seems like a little bit faster, even though you're not, but because you're at a lower altitude, it seems like you're going faster. So it'll actually go in front of the International Space Station and continue to do so as it preps for some of those future deorbit or departure burns. That's departure burn 2. There's a departure burn 3, and then a departure phase burn.
Then, of course, the exciting part whenever we get to jettison the trunk and essentially return Crew Dragon back to Earth in the deorbit burn. As we've mentioned before, we jettison the trunk in order to reveal the heat shield. That is the component of the spacecraft that is critical to helping slow the spacecraft down. It's essentially going 17,000 miles per hour right now, and we're going to be slowing it down using the heat shield and the friction caused by re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, slow it down to about 350 miles per hour. At which point we will then deploy drogue parachutes as well as main parachutes and essentially bring the spacecraft down to a mere 15 miles per hour or so for splashdown. Once again, we're targeting a splashdown around 7:30 p.m. Pacific this afternoon off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. So right now the crew has doffed or taken off their suits and not too much activity going on at the moment. So we're going to go into a quick break period, but we will be back shortly with more activity.